Good afternoon, Senator.
Hello, how are you?
Great. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, happy to be with you.
Well, Senator, you are kicking off Kelly Cawthorn's first in a series of webinars for our clients, and we're really excited to have you as we start this new year fresh from what was kind of a crazy end of 2025. And we are really looking forward to this year ahead, and we're looking forward to talking to you about what we can expect and kind of looking and reflecting back on all of the great work that you and your colleagues did over the last 2 years, but what you have probably left on your to-do list over the next 2 years as you continue to lead this caucus throughout the remainder of your term here. So if you don't mind, we'll just start right
Sure.
off here.
Yeah.
So, Senator, during the Democratic trifecta over the last 2 years, you passed a number of really significant policies. What would you say you were most proud of?
Yeah, I think some of the things that, well, first of all, thanks for having me.
We're really happy to have
And
you.
yeah, it's always good to have a fresh start with a new term and a new configuration of power. And so new challenges, new opportunities. But I think looking back at the last 2 years, our trifecta was, obviously there was a little bit of a bumpy ending there over in the House, but we still have a lot that we can be very proud of. And, some of our initial things that we were able to get done in just the first 100 days, I think are among our accomplishments that we were really, really proud of, including, the largest tax cut for working families in the history of Michigan with the earned income tax credit or working families tax credit expansion, and then the getting more money back in the pockets of retirees through the retirement tax cut. Those two things alone were great. But in addition to that, we were able to make some progress on gun violence prevention. We made progress on energy policy, which placed us, among the top tier of states in terms of being able to address climate change and the coming need for renewable energy. We expanded the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. So I think that is incredibly important given that some of those rights might be under threat from an incoming Trump administration. And overwhelmingly, our constituents support what we did. That's true on gun violence prevention as well. And it's also true for reproductive health care, being able to ensure that people have the ability to get the care that they need and to be able to make their own choices is something that is overwhelmingly supported by our constituents across the state of both parties. So those things were incredibly important for us to be able to get done. There's a lot of other things as well that we could count as our successes, but I think those are among the highlights.
Well, one of the things we saw on Friday was the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference that the conference revised their projections for increases in projected revenues for the next coming two budgets. What would you say Democrats, I think under your leadership, were doing in terms of helping to improve the economy and continue that increase? Because I would say, obviously, you guys were doing something right to ensure those numbers continue to rise over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think it's an affirmation that putting money back in pockets through those, earlier things that I just mentioned with retirement tax and working families tax credit, those things pay off. Those folks are, able to then keep that money circulating in the economy, which is better for, like sales and use tax revenues, that kind of thing. We also saw income tax revenue for the state go up. I think, that's an indication that incomes were better. So it's a sign of confidence in the policies that we have been committing to. And I would also add, we did a lot of things in the budget to enable people to be able to get the education that they need, to be able to go to college for free, to be able to, or nearly free for community college, to be able to get their kids into the early childhood education, the 4-year-old preschool kind of category. So keeping those dollars in people's pockets enables them to just do more with that and more stable households, better retirement savings, all of that. So I think as we continue to see those trends, it's a sign of confidence in the economic policies that we have promoted.
Well, I know a lot of our clients were excited to hear the revenue forecast as we go into this next budget year for sure. And we'll get into a little bit more questions along what we hope to look forward to in the budgeting process in just a second. But I think a couple of us had questions about going back in terms of, lame duck was really unexpected, very different from anything I know I've seen in a number, or I guess all of my years of working downtown, with a lot of twists and turns. How did you lead your caucus to continue to persevere for nearly 30 hours and keep going in knowing that a lot of their bills were dying a very painful death at the end there? And I guess I'll add a question at the end here now with what was unexpected too as of last week with several of really key priorities not being presented to the governor per the speaker.
Yeah. So the first part, keeping the caucus together. I think any observer in Lansing over the last 2 years has seen that our caucus has been incredibly unified. We've been able to find ways to work together and to stay together and to really get important policy done and to do it efficiently and quickly without sacrificing process. So, for the most part, things went through rigorous committee processes, even the stuff that we were voting on in lame duck, despite the speeches from the other side of the aisle. It was well vetted policy and did enjoy committee hearings in either chamber and often in both. So we have very positive relationships with one another. I think there's a genuine respect for the professional work that each of our members has been able to do. There's a respect for the concerns that each member has based on their district and the individual characteristics there, but also the policy priorities of each member. And so I think it's good for any caucus when you have caucus members who understand that their priority is important to them, and in order for it to be important to their colleagues whose vote they need to reciprocate that respect, that interest, and that willingness to compromise when it comes to coming together around policy that can get through the chamber. So I think that's just the foundation of where we started. And of course, as we saw things evolve over in the House with the Republicans refusing to show up, with the failure to be able to get a quorum, it became very clear to us that we had priorities that even though they weren't necessarily our bills, we really believed it was important for us to do as much good as we could in the time that we had left. And so we were very resolved to get as many bills as we could to the governor's desk that we had originally planned to act on. So it was rigorous and it was hard at times, but our caucus showed a maturity and a professionalism and a commitment, I think, ultimately to our constituents that was pretty selfless. Can't remember who said it. I think maybe it was Ronald Reagan. But, it's amazing how much you can get done if you don't care who gets credit for it. He's probably not the first to have said it, but I think that's true in politics, and it's true in most of life. And I am just very proud of our caucus and their ability to not just get stuff done for Democrats, but to truly be leaders in our state when it comes to doing what we believe is right and what our constituents are asking for, and to get the best policy to put Michigan in the best position going forward.
Definitely, Senator. I would say that our clients were grateful for the work that you continued to do throughout the day and the night and the next day, because there were a number of issues that remained on the agenda that but for your willingness to stay and to do the right thing and to not care who got credit, would not have gotten done. And a lot of time and effort did go into doing that. So there are a lot of very grateful people for that. Now, I guess on to the second part of that question and really trying to understand, have you and your caucus and the House and the governor taken a closer look at the legalities of what the speaker is doing with those remaining bills, and what are the options for ensuring those can be presented to the governor at some point in the future?
Yeah, I think the decision we saw incoming Speaker Hall take, it was unprecedented in terms of standing in the way of something that had all, bills that had passed both chambers and been enrolled. I think it's very clear in the Constitution that if it has been enrolled, it shall be presented to the governor. There have been bills that have been presented throughout January in the past. It's been a slightly different situation where it's been a different configuration of power. Historically, where they have not had to worry about somebody standing in the way, it was just a matter of timing. So we're in a bit of an unprecedented legal situation in terms of those kinds of details. But we certainly are incredibly concerned, and I don't believe that it's the right thing to do when something gets through the legislature. The clerk or the new speaker does not have veto power. That is left up only to the governor. So we certainly hope to have this resolved in a way that reflects the will of the legislature as the people had elected us to do their work in the previous term. So we will continue to monitor that, and we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll be talking with our partners and certainly with the governor's office to ensure that those have the best chance of getting to her desk and earning her signature.
So I'm going to pause right here because I was so excited to just get started that I failed to, one, properly introduce you because I just probably assumed that everybody knew you and didn't need any real introduction. So failure on my part, forgive me, everyone who's participating on this. And two, what I also wanted to say is that we will be taking time in just a moment for Q&A. And if you would like to ask a question, please just put it in the chat and we will make sure to get those questions asked and answered from the senator. But for those that do not know Senator Brinks, she is serving as the Senate Majority Leader, the first woman Senate Majority Leader, and has been doing an amazing job leading this caucus and making sure that the priorities of the state and the priorities that her caucus has asked her to bring forth have been successfully taken to the forward through the policies that they've passed. So we're, again, very excited to have you, and thank you for this conversation that we're having this afternoon. Apologize for just jumping right in here.
Sure.
Back to it. As you look back, were there any items that you would say were left undone last session that you would like to put on your priority list for this session? What might be your top few priorities for 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, we'd certainly like to see some things that didn't get all the way over the line have greater success. Things like FOIA, right, it has broad bipartisan support. It's something we've worked on for the better part of a decade. There's really no excuse for Michigan to be, one of only 2 states in the nation that does not subject the legislature and the governor's office to the Freedom of Information Act. So we'll continue to push that. I think it's important transparency, particularly at a time where people's trust in government is low or cynicism is high, I would say. There are other things. We worked on meaningful policy around reducing the price of prescription drugs. So we've got the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. We'd love to see that get some traction. There are a number of other bill packages that we were able to make some progress on. There's statute of limitations on sexual assault. There's some criminal justice items that didn't get finished. There are a number of other things that I think could be bipartisan in nature. If there is a meaningful conversation about road funding, for instance, that's an opportunity for us. And we will, I'm sure, continue our conversations around economic development, and both of those things will play a large role in our budget conversations. So I am optimistic that we will be able to find things that we can work together with the Republican House caucus on, and I'm hopeful that we can have meaningful conversations around the budget. In the Senate, we know our assignment. We fully intend to have a budget ready for voting on by the end of June, as required by law, and so I'm hopeful that we will have willing partners in the House to get that done in a responsible and timely manner. So I think ultimately, as we look forward to the next 2 years, there will be those opportunities. We're still navigating what this new relationship looks like in terms of the changes in the balance of power. But I'm confident that there will be some things that if we put our minds to it and there's a commitment to working together, that we'll be able to get them done.
Senator, one of the first few items that the Senate introduced were amendments to the Earned Sick Time Act and the changes to the minimum wage laws. Are you hopeful that we will see a compromise to those bills before the implementation date of February 21st?
So I think our commitment as Democrats in the Senate is to ensure that people get a raise. That was the original intent of the initiative when it was when they gathered signatures to place it on the ballot. Despite the Republican-led legislature at that time, taking in what has now been determined to be an unconstitutional action by adopting and amending it, I think it is clear that there is room for additional clarity in terms of certainly on the paid sick leave time, and for clearing up any questions so that employers and employees both know what to expect and how to navigate that and how to keep track of it in a way that is the easiest way possible for employers and employees. But at the end of the day, we don't have any interest in undercutting the original intent of making sure that that employees in our economy are adequately able to take care of their families, whether it is with that earned paid sick time or through fair wages. So you'll see in our proposal, an acceleration of the time that the wages rise. So it goes into effect earlier. You'll also see, in comparison to the Republican proposal, the inclusion of businesses that are 25 employees and up in a more meaningful way, as opposed to their proposals that really exempt a very large portion of businesses from having to provide any of this at all for their employees. We don't think that that's what the people of Michigan would have supported, and so we will continue to fight for those workers and for that clarity for those businesses. At the same time, protecting the smallest businesses from onerous obligations that are going to be really difficult, that might threaten their ability to survive. So we've been listening to workers in all industries, particularly in the service industries, for many months. We've been hearing from employers as well, and from various stakeholders. So we will do our best to ensure that people are getting a raise, that they have what the initiative intended, and we're doing it in a way that is fair to employers.
Thanks, Senator. I don't see any questions yet, so I'm going to ask another question here. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We have just a couple minutes left with Senator Brinks before she needs to leave. So please feel free to, again, add any questions you might have. Senator, you have one less member with Senator, or now Congresswoman McDonald Rivet having won her election. Do you anticipate this affecting the Senate's ability to pass legislation this session?
So first of all, congratulations to her. Of course, we're very pleased to see her success. We know she was a great caucus member here for us in the state Senate, and she'll be a great congresswoman for Michigan. So I think that that bodes well for her district and for our state. But yes, we still have a majority of senators elected and serving as Democrats. So to the extent that we need to, we will still be able to stand together as Democrats and pass meaningful legislation. So it really doesn't change the math on our ability to get things done. And we will, of course, continue to monitor that district. And if and when a special is called, be ready for that. So that we have really positive representation there for the district that is currently vacant. But in the meantime, we'll make sure we take care of those constituents. And we feel very positive about the position that we're in still in terms of being able to really effectively get legislation passed.
Senator, do you expect a special election to be called this year?
So that's obviously up to the governor. We are keeping a close eye on it, and we'll be in discussion with her about that and what's best, but it is her decision.
Well, we had one question that popped up in the Q&A. It's, when do you expect Governor Whitmer to release her proposed FY26 budget?
Yeah, that generally happens. I see Marianne Cleary's on. It generally happens in the beginning of February, if I'm not mistaken. So I would anticipate that that would happen as usual.
And then we just had another question arrive. What can Dems do to get a Dem elected in the Senate, Senator McDonald Rivet's district?
Yeah, certainly all the things that we have to do to get a Dem elected in at any point. But we are in the process of talking with potential candidates there. So there will be somebody good that you can feel confident in supporting when the time frame is clear. So just keeping an eye on that and being ready to help when that becomes when the timeline is known is a key there. I will say this could be a very expensive race. It was expensive as a district before, and because it does have the potential to determine the majority in the state Senate, it's going to be an incredibly important race. So we stand ready. We are organized. We have a solid team of legislators as well as staff who know how to fight in tough districts and win. We've got a long history of that in my resume and in Darren Camilleri's resume, and he is leading up our campaign operation. And that's just the two of us. There are, several more who know how to run really effective, solid campaigns. So we feel like we're in a very good position, and we will keep you posted on how you can help.
Well, thanks, Senator. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions at the moment. I think we are giving you just a couple minutes of your time back. We're going to be timely this morning or this afternoon. Once again, we're really grateful for the opportunity to have this discussion and to allow for our Kelly Cawthorn clients to hear what you have to say and the outlook for 2025 and 2026 session. We're really grateful to be able to work together and know that we have a wonderful partner in you and the Senate Democratic Caucus. We look forward to continuing to work together. And if you ever need anything from us at Kelly Cawthorn or our clients, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to join you. Always appreciate talking with folks at your firm. And I can't see all of your clients, but thanks for joining and for staying engaged. Kelly Cawthorn does a great job for you, in case you didn't know that. But we appreciate your interest. And as always, they know how to get a hold of us. And we are excited to work together for a productive 2 years.
Thank you, Senator.
Yep. All right.
Okay, we are now going to pivot to our House Fiscal Agency Director, Mary Ann Cleary. On Friday, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference met and reviewed the report, which showed revenues were higher than anticipated. And we are going to get an overview from Mary Ann on what actually was said, because I think we're all trying to understand what that means and how we can actually spend all of the extra money that's out there, because I know that's what we're all planning to do, Mary Ann, and you can bat us all away because maybe it's not that much extra money, or maybe it is that much extra money. But we're all excited to understand what the CREC report really said for the coming 2 years. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mary Ann, and we are going to allow for a little bit of a Q&A period when you have finished your overview, if that's okay.
Sure, that sounds good. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so there was stuff said and stuff not said that kind of happens behind the scenes. So let me just quickly talk about the Consensus Revenue Estimate Conference, which was held on Friday. That was our January one. The results of this one will be the governor's budget will be based off of the revenues that were determined at this revenue conference. And then there'll be another one that's held again in May that will determine sort of where the budget goes, where the numbers are, and then how the budget gets resolved in May. So whenever that does happen. But two things kind of happened at that revenue conference. First, we talked about the state economy. So there was a couple different presentations on the economy. And I think overall, everyone is feeling fine about the economy. It's just kind of going status quo, a little bit up, nothing of concern that was raised in those presentations or with our staff economists that also presented. And then the second thing that happened, which is what everyone really cares about, is the state revenues. And at that conference, we set the amount of general fund and the amount of school aid fund revenues that we believe the state will have available for the governor's recommendation. And I know the question was, when will that come out? Constitutionally, it has to come 30 days after session started. So I'm going to guess around February 5th, 6th, 7th. Will be that day. It's usually the Wednesday, so I think that's the 5th of February is when we're anticipating that. So we did come to a consensus on revenues. There is additional revenue, both in general fund and school aid fund. So instead of giving you a bunch of numbers, let me just sort of give you the quick highlights in that. So on general fund and school aid, like I said, revenues were adjusted upward. The big revenue that was adjusted upward was income tax, specifically withholding is very strong, and it's our largest component of all of our revenues. Quarterly payments were up, and then refunds were less negative. And so that means additional revenues from the income tax. So of all of the numbers, you know, for the 2 years, we were up $612 million in income tax revenue. Sales tax was also up. Not, you know, magnitude wise, $73 million. So that's 75% of that goes to the school aid fund. The state education property tax, which is the 6 mills that people pay on their property, that was also up almost $60 million. That also goes to the school aid fund. So those were the kind of the big pieces that were adjusted that kind of then get carried forward. So these we're adjusting the 24 year that just ended. But then because those were base increases, that means we adjust 25 and then 26 numbers for these big increases. And so when we revised our estimates for fiscal year 24 and 25 in the general fund, between the 2 years, it was an extra $614 million of additional revenue. Now, however, what you didn't see on the flip side of that, and these are for fiscal year 24 and 25, since we have budgets in place. So I don't really talk about 26. I know there's numbers there for 26, but hit that in just a second here. So 614 million for the 2 years combined. But then we also know that there's additional Medicaid costs related to caseloads that's going to impact the amount of money, additional revenue. And then there was an accounting adjustment that happened actually in fiscal year 23 that impacts 24 related to the EITC. So the amount of money that's actually available is a little bit less than the numbers that you saw there. So our balance sheet now, our balance sheet, House Fiscal, since we don't have a joint one at this point, we're showing that there's just under $700 million available in fiscal year 25. So when the budget was passed back in June, there was only 200 million left. So it's an increase of $500 million available on the balance sheet for your fiscal year 25. So from all of those additional revenues and changes. So that's what we're looking at now, $700 million. Of that, then we go look at fiscal year 26 and we say, okay, how much does it cost to pay for the same programs that we have now in place? We remove any one-time funding, which is over $1 billion. And we take a look at that, add economics, add maybe caseload costs, things that we are anticipating will have additional expenses related to it. So we believe there's about $1.1 billion available on top of what's already sort of in place for the governor's budget proposal to be enhanced. So she has basically, I think, a little over $1 billion of new funding available for the general fund for her fiscal year 26 budget. School aid, that's a different story. I was actually very surprised at the outcome of this. I didn't see this one coming. So school aid had additional revenue of $300 million in each of the fiscal years. So in fiscal year 24, 25, that increased each 326, which we really didn't talk about much, is another 300 million. But the other thing happening in school aid is some big lapses. So as fiscal year 24 closes, and they close out books and they've done work projects and stuff, they've made the decision not to work project stuff and lapse about $316 million, of which I think it was about 185 million was from the Great Start School Readiness Program, which is the 4-year-old daycare or 4-year-old preschool program. A lot of money was put into that program. Obviously, I think we all anticipated that they weren't going to spend all of that additional funding. But anyway, so that was a big chunk of this, and some changes to our costs. So like as the 6 mills increases, it's based on property tax. So as property taxes on homes increase, the amount of money you need to fund foundation allowance decreases, state money decreases. So there were some savings also in there. So when I take all of this into account, when fiscal year 25 budget was passed, it was $10 million left on the balance sheet. Today, it's about $1 billion that is left on the balance sheet for fiscal year 25. Like I said, that's a huge number. It also takes into account some other the pupil estimates that they did during the consensus estimate. So we did the same exercise. So what does it cost to continue paying for the same programs in fiscal year 26 as it does in 25? Remove all of the one-time funding in there, and we think there's about $2 billion on the balance sheet for fiscal year 26. So $2 billion more than what was available, or for what's available for the administration to set their priority on school aid. Like I said, that's a big number, a number I did not had anticipated that large. So like I said, yeah.
Can I just stop you
Sure.
right there? Because
I know it's a lot of numbers.
Well, I just want to make sure I heard that number correctly. So for FY26, for the governor's executive recommendation, she has an additional $2 billion. Is that what
$2 billion in school aid fund and $1 billion in general fund.
Those are some pretty big numbers.
Those are some big numbers. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So her budget in the beginning of February, we'll, I assume, include funding, all of that funding, or other priorities that she may have.
I just heard Dave Ladd scream from DeWitt someplace. I mean, he's doing a happy dance somewhere.
Um, well, then we'll just, I have a new boss in the House, a new speaker, and he's talked a lot about tax cuts. So just to put things into perspective, to give you an idea, so the income tax rate is at 4.25. So for each 0.1% reduction in the rate, it's going to cost about $340 million. So, if you go down, I mean, we'll just say that each 1% reduction is $340 million. 25% of that goes to the school aid fund. So when you talk about distribution, roughly 75 goes to the general fund, 25 goes to the school aid fund. The other piece that the conversation that's also happening is the removal of the sales tax on gas for road funding. So it's about a $900 million reduction in sales tax revenue. Almost 700 of that is school aid fund revenue. A little bit of it is the constitutional revenue sharing, about 95 million, and about 115 million to general fund, and a little bit to the transportation fund. So, when I think what they're going to look at is, okay, there's $1 billion there for general fund. There's $2 billion in school aid fund. Is there enough money to do some of this stuff? And so I'm sure that will be looked at this point, but I think those are kind of the highlights I wanted to hit with you on that, and for you guys to think about.
Just one question: when we're looking at the 1 billion versus 2 billion additional revenues, I guess the question for us when we're looking at things like removing the sales tax on gas, because would be an ongoing item, right? And the 2 billion is that considered a one-time?
Great question. That's a great question. I just actually pull up my balance sheet. So of the sort of $1+ billion of general fund, about 525 million of that is what we would consider ongoing costs, things that you can build in year after year. And a little over 600 million would be one time. Let me get my school aid fund sheet. So of the school aid fund, of the 2 billion, half of it is ongoing and half of it is one time.
How are those two things determined? I guess the ongoing versus the one time?
So what we look at is how much of your revenues that you've built into your budget are ongoing revenues. And for the most part, there's not any sort of one-time things that we have built in. And then we go and we actually look at how much we spend on ongoing. And we kind of sort of just take the difference, right? There are one-time things that happen in the budget besides programs and special projects. We know there's a potential lawsuit that's coming down and we may have to build that on a balance sheet, but it's a one-time type of thing. Supplementals are usually considered one-time funding. And so we kind of back those kind of things out. But it is as simple as sort of what's your revenue base versus what do you have, and you're spending for ongoing.
Well, Miriam, we have a number of questions that have come in. If you don't
Okay.
mind, I might try and go through a few of these.
That's fine.
So the first one was I missed what you said about the GSRP. Did the state spend less than intended on GSRP? If so, how much?
So yes, the state spent less on their GSRP. So they're building it up to trying to do 100% of all 4-year-olds. There was never enough money in the budget to do 100%, but I think they're gearing up. And so it was about 185 million, if I remember correctly, that they did not spend on their funding in GSRP. And you know what? I don't know what the total number is at the moment that they spend on GSRP.
All right, the next question is, how much is in the UIA
Mm.
fund?
A lot. I'm gonna tell you, it's a lot. Nobody's worried about it. That's how I always know there's a lot of money. Nobody's talking about it. And I'm sorry, I don't have that answer. The one of the lawsuits is about I think $120 million is what the state's gonna have to pay back. And again, I don't have all of the details on that. They kind of just throw those things at me. But I do know everyone is comfortable with the amount of money or where we stand with the unemployment insurance balance.
Yeah, typically if they're not bringing it up, then it's
Exactly.
funded.
At least at this point, right? Because we haven't had a lot of, the unemployment rate is low, right?
Right.
And so, and as, you pay into it, so.
All right, here's another question for you. There is a lot of talk about the federal government possibly reducing spending. How does that play into state revenue forecasting, especially with things like reduced federal dollars for Medicaid?
So when we do our estimates, we do it off of current law, right? And so we haven't really built anything in to revenues or expenditures based on any potential change in federal law. So for, in this case, we haven't built anything in, we just are monitoring the changes. I think the consensus is it's gonna take if they do make changes, it's gonna take a little while for it to flow down to the state. And so I would say we would know more in May at a May revenue estimating conference. And we'll also see, stuff in the news, press releases, things that the department will get on changes to Medicaid. But I just think that all takes time and it doesn't happen, in a month or two.
We will see what happens at the federal level here soon, won't we?
Exactly. I mean, we all built that in as a risk in our forecast, but
Sure.
it's just an unknown. We think, some of the tax cuts, all of those things will stay, but those are sort of current law right now. So we continue those type of things in our estimate.
All right, one other question we have, and if you have any additional questions, we do have some time for others. How much of the school aid balance will be used for the new MIPSR's rate cap?
I think I was told that it's not much. There's not much. It's already built into that number. So when my school aid people did the balance sheets, it's all part of that CSB, that current services baseline, what it costs. And so that's already built in. And so I was told it was not a lot of money that needed to be added in on the MIPSRs.
I don't see any other questions from the crowd online here.
They're all stunned by how much money there is,
I mean, it is,
right? I mean, you
it
keep
is,
thinking it's going to get less and less and it stays the same.
that is really shocking, quite frankly. I never would have anticipated you saying $2 billion in school aid and
Me neither.
$1 billion in general fund.
But you got to remember in school aid, the 2 billion, there was a lot of one-time spends that could be added, back in. They could have been considered ongoing, but just because of the way the budget was built, they considered it, one time. But also in school aid, they're also sitting on over almost $2 billion of other money that they've set aside in special accounts, like at their rainy day fund. They have an enrollment fund. They have, 4 or 5 different special funds that when we did have a lot of money, they set it aside to spend, over the next 3 or 4 years. And so that's not spending any of that money. So there's still another, almost $2 billion set aside in some of these side accounts.
But that begs a good question. At this point, all of these additional revenues, that is beyond any ARPA dollars, right? We're
We're done with
past
ARPA.
any
Yep.
ARPA.
Yep. We've spent them all. There was a little bit left of the state fiscal recovery funds in fiscal year 20 24, maybe this first quarter of 25. And there was some boilerplate in the budget bills to allow basically, the administration do a fund shift, you know, so that it all got appropriated, and it was only $33 million that they ended up not being appropriated or not being able to spend. So it's all been committed at this point. And so, yeah, all the other ARPA dollars are all committed or not on the balance sheet anymore.
And how much is the rainy day fund for the general fund at
It's
this
about
point?
2 billion, a little over 2 billion.
It's pretty good too,
Yeah,
actually.
right.
State's sitting in a pretty okay spot.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, but you know, again, if you go into a recession, 2 billion
Can
will go pretty quick.
Yeah, right. Right. Well, are there any other remaining questions for Mary Ann at this point? I think we're all leaving on a positive, excited note, about the potential of either tax cuts or infrastructure funding or Dave Ladd's, new K-12 spending plan. All right. Well, Director Clary, thank you so much for your time today. We really
Absolutely. Hopefully
appreciate
that was
this.
helpful.
Yeah, it was very helpful. We really appreciate a little bit better understanding of the state's revenue and forecast for this next appropriation cycle. And we look forward to hearing from, hopefully you, again, if you're willing to come back in
Sure.
May at the next
Sure, we'll see.
consensus revenue estimating conference.
Great.
All right. For everyone online, we are looking forward to continuing these webinars monthly, and we will be sending out a list of upcoming webinars. Our next confirmed webinar will be February 14th with State Budget Director Jen Flood. We do have a few others that we're working to confirm, but we will be sending registration links soon. So please look forward in the emails, and we hope to see you on the next ones. Thank you for your attendance today. We really appreciate it. This was recorded and will be on our website for everyone to view if they missed anything. Thank you. Have a great day.